Hello, everyone. This is a exceedingly off-the-cuff and sort of spontaneous live stream I thought I would do. I've talked about this a couple of nights in a row now on Lords of the Night, ever since the interview or the comments were made public by Zac Efron. And I don't know. I just felt inspired to make a few rants, I suppose, about his comments in relation to the situation. For those of you that have listened to Lords of the Night the last couple of nights, this might not end up being any different than what you've already heard from me, but I figured I would just do a isolated, complete recitation of my thoughts on the matter. Hello to those who have joined me in the chat for this little sojourn into irritation, I suppose. Jesse Green, hello. Vincent Graymore, hello. Kyler, hello. Corey Suzuki, hello. Johnny Hellcat, hello. Sweet Chili Tea, hello. Chicago Mike, hello. Nothing for you here. Hate Camel, Asian Hippie, hello. Hope everyone is well on this Sunday. So I'm going to read segments from the story from the Daily Wire that covers his comments. So just for context, Zac Efron is an actor, and he recently portrayed Ted Bundy in a Netflix exclusive, I believe it is, series, or it's either a film or a series. I'm not exactly sure. I think it's a single one-off film. The film is called Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. And from what I understand, it is based on a book written by Ted Bundy's girlfriend slash wife. I honestly forget if he married her. I believe it is the mother of his only child. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize, but that is my understanding. But Zac Efron was interviewed briefly by Fox News at the Tribeca Film Festival. Now, so far as I know, this was not video recorded. If there's video out there of it, well, I'm not aware of it right now. I would do a video on it otherwise, but here are the comments as quoted by the Daily Wire from Fox News by Zac Efron. Ted Bundy is a vile, vile human being. There is no part of this at all, ... I can't express how much I loathe the man that this movie is about, Efron said. The fact is, this movie really happened. The fact is that the whole world, literally all the media, everybody, was capable of believing that this guy was innocent. Talk about white privilege. Talk about white ... whatever. Every major topic in this movie is bent on showing you how evil this person is, unquote. Continuing further, quote, when you see this movie, when you see the movie, if you don't think that either me or Ted Bundy is the biggest piece of shit in the world and don't want to be like him, then something's wrong, unquote, he said. Later on the Ellen DeGeneres show, he said this, quote, Ted Bundy was a clean-cut white dude who just did not seem white person. I don't know what that means. I'm pausing myself here. I'm interrupting myself, as I sometimes do, but I'm going to read that again because this is what is quoted. Ted Bundy was a clean-cut white dude who just did not seem white person. So talk about white privilege, Efron said. What he got away with back then, nobody would be able to do today. It's a moment in time that came and passed, and it's truly scary, but it does not glamorize the killing. This is an important thing for me, unquote. Okay, now, let's see. Where was this in the story here? There's a further quote here. Zac Efron is not the first person to say that White Bundy. My brain is going all over the place. Let me try that again. Zac Efron is not the first person to say that Ted Bundy was a benefactor of white privilege. When Netflix released the Ted Bundy tapes, Refinery 29, I don't know what Refinery 29 is. Let me see if I can figure that out real quick. Refinery29.com. It's some kind of media site. So this is a quote from another media site. Claimed that America's obsession with whiteness made his personality bigger than it actually was. Quote, the Ted Bundy of America's consciousness is a myth. Bundy was not special. He was not smarter than the average person. He did not have a personality so alluring that his female victims could not help but simply go off with him. He did not have a superhuman skill to be one step ahead of the police. What Bundy did have was the power of being a white man in a society that reveres them and has implicit faith in their abilities. This privilege gave Bundy the ability to make even the most heinous of crimes take second place to his personality. Bundy isn't even exceptional when compared to other American serial killers, so why is his legacy treated with fascination and twisted admiration rather than condemnation? Okay. So there's a couple of things here. These are my reflexive thoughts. Okay. I have read several books regarding Ted Bundy. I have seen several documentaries. However, I make no claim as to be an expert on the Ted Bundy case, Ted Bundy as a person, or anything else regarding Ted Bundy other than just a mere layman observer. Let me put that up as preamble. But in regards to Zac Efron, and, I am conjoining slightly this, whatever it was called, Refinery 29's comments. Zac Efron seems to imply that because Ted Bundy was a white man, that he enjoyed white privilege. And this white privilege somehow, I don't know, afforded him the benefit of being able to, quote unquote, get away with these crimes or take advantage of the situation. Now, for those of you who are unaware, Ted Bundy was pursued for years by armies of law enforcement officers in multiple states, Washington State, Colorado, Utah, Florida, and onward. He was not let or allowed to do this stuff, and certainly not because he was white. The fascination with Bundy was that by physical appearance and by mannerism, he was a novelty. And at the time, the late 70s, early to mid 80s, at the time, especially with the advancements in media coverage, news coverage, information distribution by the networks and newspapers and everything else, he was an anomaly to most Americans and other people in the world. You had a guy here who was not some drooling, monstrous-looking individual. You had someone who was the gentleman, the charming, didn't appear to be the kind of person who would take advantage of or murder people. He didn't look like the stereotypical image of a killer, of a monster. He looked like your next-door neighbor. He looked like the professor at the school down the street. That's what fascinated people. The most unassuming person. That's both what fascinated people and frightened people. Ted Bundy became sort of the archetype of the anybody could be a psycho notion. Now, Ted Bundy was not the first charming murderer. He was not the first person to be the most unassuming of criminals. But he had a charisma. He had a allure to him because of his personality, because of his background, and certainly because of his appearance. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Ted Bundy had the looks of someone who could have been a Hollywood star or something, and a lot of papers made big headlines about that. Now, can you blame Ted Bundy's mystique on the media? To a certain extent, certainly. He had a lot more coverage than a lot of other serial killers out there. I'm not going to deny it. But he also had an exceedingly strange and unique interaction with law enforcement. between the multiple murders he committed, the multiple descriptions of what he looked like, his ability to change his appearance. On top of that, his ability to escape the law. I mean, he escaped from police custody twice, if I recall correctly, and was able to go out on the lam. Once he got away in Utah for a brief time before he was recaptured, and then he escaped again, fled to Florida, committed more murders before he was captured again. Just in the scale of a story, as a criminal, as an escapee, as a murderer, there's a lot to the Ted Bundy case. But the implication from Zac Efron and this, I keep forgetting the name, Refinery 29, is that somehow his white skin allowed him or benefited him in the course of things. All right, well, let's take a look at a couple of options of what Zac Efron could have been saying there, because there's a couple of different interpretations. Either he's saying that because Ted Bundy was white, that law enforcement and the world at large didn't care that he was killing people, didn't mind that he was on the run because he was Ted Bundy and because he was white. All right, well, if we take that interpretation, then you are saying that all of the law enforcement individuals, all of the victims' families that wanted him found, all of the victims, few as they were, who survived him, were not that concerned. You know, he's white. It's okay. He can go out and murder people and rape women and, sodomize them and eat them. And it doesn't matter. Whatever. I mean, there are other killers out there who are more important because they're not white. Ted Bundy, he's a low priority. Anyone who has read anything up on this case, anybody who has read anything about the law enforcement officials, the detectives, the police officers, everybody who was involved trying to track down who for a long time they only knew as Ted. If you know anything about the amount of stress, the amount of depression, the number of marriages destroyed as a result of detectives dedicating their lives and their time and their energy and their passion to tracking this guy down and stopping him, then you know that Ted Bundy did not possess any privilege against the efforts of law enforcement because he was white. And to me, and again, I am not a law enforcement official. I've never been in law enforcement. I am just a layman citizen. I have read and looked into multiple true crime situations and serial killers and such through books and novels and TV things. It is a morbid fascination of mine. Anybody who's watched my channel or listened to me before knows this. But when it comes down to the efforts undertaken by law enforcement to track these kind of guys down, I have the utmost respect. And when I read multiple stories upon multiple stories of detectives and police officers risking their lives, risking their sanity, putting in their time, risking their marriages, trying to track down these guys, trying to put away the most heinous of criminals, spending years of their life trying to find one guy, needle in a haystack. To say that Ted Bundy got away with it because he was white is an insult to every law enforcement official who ever put in an hour's worth of time trying to stop this guy. Okay? So that's interpretation number one. He got away with it because law enforcement were concerned because he was white. Thank you, CL77. Appreciate the George Washington there. It'll go towards some goldfish. Now, the other interpretation you could say, you could conjure as to the accusation that Ted Bundy got away with it because he was white, is that he was allowed the opportunity to kill these women because he was white. All right. Well, I'm going to very generously set aside all those instances where he broke into the homes of women and murdered them in their sleep or otherwise, because there wasn't really any social interaction there to begin with. But if you're going to say that his skin color provided him a privilege to get away with it, as in to have the opportunity to kill these women, well, then I can only assume then that you are saying that all of the women he encountered personally, that he took advantage of, that he charmed or manipulated, were racists. That they looked at him and said, yeah, because he's white, I trust him. So I'm going to let him get close enough to me to risk my safety. I'm going to extend out my goodwill towards a guy who seems to be injured with a cast on his arm and help him put something into his car. That's what happened to two of his victims. He went to a park. He had a cast on his arm. He portrayed himself as someone who was injured or disabled. And he was able to convince at least two women. And we don't know how many others he might have tried this ploy on previously, but at least two women on that day, out of their own goodwill, out of their own sense of good Samaritan, they decided to help this hurt man put something into his car. And because they were nice enough, because they were trusting enough of someone they saw who was in need of help, they ended up losing their lives. Through no fault of their own, but because this monster decided to do it. Is that white privilege? Is that what it is? Those women were so racist that they saw a white man and said, yes, I'm going to put myself in potentially harm's way because I only appreciate white people. Is that the accusation now? He got away. He was able to have the opportunity because his victims were white supremacists or something. I'm not quite sure how else to take that comment from Zac Efron. I don't know how else to take that comment from Refinery 29. I don't know what to tell you. What allowed Ted Bundy to do what he did is because he was a narcissistic sociopath. Charming people, manipulating them, fed his ego. Having control over his victims fed his ego. Feeding his ego to the nth degree beyond any rational human being is what allowed, quote unquote, Ted Bundy to do what he did. Because he lacked any of the civilized limitations that the 99% of the rest of us possess. You know, if you have no morals, if you have no sense of right and wrong, you can do a whole lot of damage, and it certainly does not matter what color your skin is. And so for Zac Efron or Refinery 29 or these guys to mark it up as, well, obviously society in general, or the victims in particular, just sort of gave him a pass because he was white. Oh, okay. Well, golly. That's an indictment of the rest of us and of his victims. That the rest of us don't see Ted Bundy as a monster. Now, as I said in my Chris Watts follow-up a few weeks back, or a couple months back now, I guess, my morbid fascination with true crime and murderers and serial killers and stuff does not equate to glorification. Now, I don't feel a particular need to have to explain myself, but some of the comments I got in some previous videos seem to not quite understand where my stance is on this. So just for the sake of edification, I've always been fascinated, morbidly fascinated by the concept of evil, you know? To reduce it down a bit too simplistically, look at Thanos, the character in the Avengers movies, or Doctor Doom. You have these characters who are, by all rights to the rest of us, villains. But in their own minds, they think they're doing something right, or they think they're doing the right thing, or they feel justified. They don't see themselves as the villain. And that sort of disconnect between intent and outcome and what is conceived of as evil versus good it is a philosophical question that has sparked my imagination for years, and multitude of philosophers over the course of human history. And serial killers in our modern day and in our modern analysis sort of exemplify the epitome of what, on an earthly plane, most of us consider to be evil. And I've always been curious about this, but I don't glorify them. I don't think they're cool. I may make light of them. I may joke about them, because what else do you do with evil things but to make fun of them, to reduce them down, to take away their power? Ted Bundy's not a hero. He's not some kind of icon. He is a creature of fascination, and he's also a lesson as to what exists among us. I don't relish the idea that we all have to be paranoid of the guy next door, that he might be something evil. I don't like the idea that we're all more wary now of everyone and can't at least extend the benefit of the doubt. But Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, the Zodiac Killer, Randy Kraft. I mean, it goes on. It goes on forever. There's so many of them. They make up such a tiny percentage of our population, but they're out there. And Ted Bundy just happened to be every American's sort of wake-up call to the possibilities of what a monster could look like. And that's kind of what carries him. The prolific nature of his killings, his grandstanding in court, his appearance, his charisma, and the legends built up around him or that are connected to him in some way. But Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, he was white, but you look at him, he's not attractive. He's not charismatic. He didn't get away with what he did for years and years and years because he was white. He got away with it for years and years and years because of the lack of technology during the time in which he was committing his crimes, and unfortunately the fact that he victimized, for the most part, prostitutes or people that were on the fringes of society. He looked for his opportunities to kill from the most vulnerable in our society, and it is unfortunate, and I'm not going to make light of that, unfortunately, the easiest to be forgotten or the easiest to be ignored. That's where he looked for his opportunities. Ridgway was a coward, like most killers. He looked for his opportunities as a predator from vulnerable people. Whereas Ted Bundy, he was a hunter. He looked for women he could take advantage of and dominate. And he took gross pleasure in being able to manipulate women into situations where he could control them or break into their homes and do whatever he was going to do. The idea that someone's skin color indemnifies them from scrutiny when they commit these crimes or from having to pay their responsibilities for them. It's an insult. It's an insult not only to the people that hunt these guys, the law enforcement people that put their lives on the line to track these guys down. It's also an insult to the victims. The victims in some cases who are just minding their own business and are guilty of nothing more than perhaps being too trustworthy of someone who came across as non-threatening because they were talented at manipulating people. Thank you, Snubbirth. Become wrath, David. Yeah. Yeah, well, 7 is a great meditation on the whole question. But anyway, like I said the last couple of nights, those comments from Zac Efron, to chalk up the evil of Ted Bundy just to the outside perception of him based on his race. Okay, if you believe in white privilege, if you think that it is a real thing, the only way white privilege works is if someone from the outside looks at you and gives you a pass because they themselves are subtly or otherwise a racial supremacist. So for Zac Efron to say that Ted Bundy got away with what he did or was able to do what he did because of white privilege means that either law enforcement and or his victims are all racists and just sort of looked at him less as a threat because he was white. Because Zac Efron apparently knows the thoughts and minds of everybody who's involved in hunting Bundy down or who are victimized by him. And that really, if you haven't been able to tell, really gets on my nerves. I have a lot of respect for the people who end up having to hunt these guys down. Because they say it's not publicized as much as the killers themselves, but the people who end up spending years and countless hours following leads, tracking down witnesses, looking for evidence, trying to find these guys when there's so little. One of the toughest crimes to solve is the crime where the victim has no connection to the suspect. And in very few cases did Ted Bundy have any prior relationship with any of his victims. He was a hunter. He was a predator. And for the law enforcement guys to go to the mat as much as and as often as they did, it reduces their role down to just sort of passive lawn chair sitting watchmen making their rounds to say that, oh, well, Bundy was white. So what do they care? Anyway, I could say it again, but I've said it enough. I'm going to go to the chat real quick for a couple minutes, and then I will wrap this up because I think I've said my piece. So if you guys have any questions or comments, pop them in there now, and I will see what I can get to. W.R. Costin says, sounds like victim blaming. Again, it depends on how you take what Zac Efron was saying or what Refinery 29 is saying, that Bundy's skin color allowed him to get away with or perpetuate these crimes. Either law enforcement didn't see him as a threat, or his victims are inherently racist because they allowed him to get close because he was white versus any other factor. Let's see. Reject says, there was a Criminal Minds character that put it perfectly. Quote, what's normal? I see a guy walking down the street with a goofy look on his face and I want to bash his head in with a hammer. To me, that's normal, unquote. Well, that's certainly a possibility. RJ Bansma, how stupid is Zac Efron? I have no idea how stupid Zac Efron is. I don't know what caused him to make that assessment. I mean, he's an actor. He's seemingly a relatively, excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. He seems to be a relatively successful actor. I have no reason to think he's stupid. But to shrug off the seriousness of Ted Bundy as a threat, simply as a sociopath and a narcissist, and to put the blame seemingly on the outside forces either tracking him or victimized by him as, well, he was white. I don't know exactly what he was trying to accomplish there. I don't know what kind of message he was trying to send. That the rest of us, that society, are to blame for Ted Bundy murdering all those people, breaking the law, escaping law enforcement, taking advantage of these women or just hunting them down in the dark. I don't know what to say. There was a massive nationwide manhunt for this guy from the moment that they were able to identify anything about him from a sketch or a name down to when they knew exactly who he was and that he was on the lam. I don't know what he was trying to say, but for lack of a better phrase, I take great offense to the implication that everybody involved in finding him were just kind of shrugging their shoulders. He's white. Or the victims are somehow to blame for their own deaths or their own assaults for the very few who survived Bundy because he was white. Anyway, Let's see. Nothing for you here says, do you think the association of Bundy to white people is intended to smear all white people as killers? I have no idea. Again, I don't claim to know the logic behind why Zac Efron said what he did. I can only take what he said and try to figure out, what he could have been saying about the situation. If I give him the benefit of the doubt, there's two possibilities, or maybe a conjoined possibility, I guess. Either he was making accusations against law enforcement, or he's making accusations against Bundy's victims. That because he was white, somehow this allowed him to, I don't know, do what he did, or escape responsibility, which ultimately he didn't, because he was arrested on multiple occasions, unfortunately, and inevitably, or eventually, I should say, put to the electric chair and executed. So, not quite sure. Let's see. Snubberth says Dennis Hopper didn't do enough serial killer roles. He should have. He scared the shit out of me as a kid in Blue Velvet. I really like Dennis Hopper. He did some goofy stuff in the 70s and everything else, and I've heard various things about his personality, but as an actor, I liked him. I don't know how many serial killer things he did aside from like Speed or Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, Blue Velvet, of course. Kyler says, I believe it's manifestation of the rejection of personal responsibility that is in vogue with a certain group in this country. Another way to look at it, Zac Efron could have been trying to insult or denigrate or dismiss Ted Bundy in the only way he knows how, I guess. But, the idea that his skin color gave him some kind of carte blanche to murder 30 plus women in some fashion. And again, like I say, the only two ways I can see to look at that is either through a lax focus of law enforcement, or the inherent racial supremacism, if that's even a word. And I know I'm an English major, but I don't claim to be a linguistics major, of white people. That Bundy's victims trusted him because he was white. How can you prove that? I couldn't possibly know. They're dead. And even if you could, would you hold that against someone who just got savagely murdered by a serial killer? I don't know, Zac Efron. I guess you're just far wiser than the rest of us. Stephen Sperling says, did Ted Bundy's victims have white privilege? Well, they had the privilege of either, in most cases, resembling in some tacit way a woman that Ted Bundy was scorned by in his past, and for a lot of instances, he took particular interest in women that resembled his former love, to take his psychotic revenge out on them. That's the privilege they had, I guess. Long brown hair, parted down the middle, and being white and relatively young. That's the privilege they enjoyed. They enjoyed the privilege of being, just by cruel fate, Bundy's preferred target, I suppose. Jesse Green says, have you ever read the Anne Rule book? Yes, The Stranger Beside Me. I've read that. I read it many, many years ago. I think I got it at a Goodwill store or something, and it wasn't the most updated version at that time, because by the time I read it most recently, and of course Anne Rule has passed away since, but she had updated that book several times over the course of the years of the investigation, to add new information or new revelations and such. So I have the most recent edition of The Stranger Beside Me, and I just read it, I want to say it was a year ago, something like that. It wasn't that long ago. So, and I just recently watched the Bundy tapes documentary on Netflix, which, it's not a book as far as its amount of detail or depth to everything that happened, but the Bundy tapes do a fairly good job of presenting the timeline of events, and also just the craziness of Bundy and his activities from the time that he was identified, and before, obviously, up through the point where he was executed. Um, let's see. Anything else? Snubber says, was any of his victims black? I do not believe so. To the best of my knowledge, none of them were. Now, that is saying those victims that we know he has either confessed to or he can be connected to. There's a great likelihood that there are other victims beyond those he confessed to that he murdered or otherwise assaulted or abused over the course of his life, but we may never know, depending. He's known to have killed 30 or thereabouts. I believe he's suspected of anywhere from 30 to 60 or something, depending on the particular interpretation of information. Thoughts from the dryer. Seen the Killing Season documentary? Not off the top of my head. And let's see. I think. Let's see. Steven Sperling says that was a good book. I read a lot of Anne Rule books. She was good at her job. Anne Rule is a very good crime writer. I think it's always beneficial to look at different sources. So if you read a book from Anne Rule on a particular case, it's always good to look at books from others. But she did a very good job on a lot of them. The Stranger Beside Me is the one book where, I don't doubt her perspective, but it's the one where, even though it's exceedingly fascinating that she knew Bundy personally, that always throws a little bit of, well, maybe there's something twinging this. And she even addresses that in her book, of course. Yeah, for the basic facts of the case and the timeline and the succession of events, the Anne Rule book is a very good book. I wouldn't trust it to say it's the only book you should read if you're interested about Bundy, but it's a very good and complete book from an interesting perspective. Let's see. And Stephen L says the TV movie with Mark Harmon as Ted Bundy is good. The Deliberate Stranger. Yes, that was Mark Harmon was like for a long time, because when I was a kid, I didn't watch the news as much or anything, but I did see that TV movie. And I always thought Mark Harmon, just as an actor and the way he carried himself, was a very good representation of how Bundy must have been like to move through the world. Because Mark Harmon, he kind of looks like that next door neighbor guy, especially back then. So he seemed to be a good fit. And in all honesty, Zac Efron, from the pictures that I've seen and the bits of video that I've seen, in a physical sense, he kind of represents the Bundy-esque character. Someone who looks like, is not only seems harmless, but is also kind of a very attractive person physically, but also exudes a certain amount of charm. So I don't have any, and I haven't seen the Zac Efron Ted Bundy movie yet. So this isn't a review of that movie. I make no critique of that. Don't know it yet. If I decide to watch it, I'm just commenting on his comments. And let's see, I'm going to wrap this up real quick. Sorry, guys. Miss Lim says, which edition of Stranger Beside Me should I read? The edition I've got has got like a blue cover. Just find the most recent edition that's out there. Like look on Amazon or something, and whatever the most recent edition is, because Anne Rule has since passed away. She's not going to be updating that book anymore. So the most recent edition would be the best edition to look at, in my opinion. And RJ Banzo says, Scribe Light, what would be your preferred drink right about now? Well, I have extolled the virtues of a pepper jack. That's Dr. Pepper and Jack Daniels. Approximately 1/4 Jack Daniels, 3/4 Dr. Pepper. If I had a recipe for it, that's about it. So on a Sunday, you couldn't do worse. Or I guess you could do worse. You could do like rot gut whiskey or something. But and Snubberth, unrelated note, someone is making an online mod for Fallout 2 that's not looking too bad. Well, with that non sequitur, I'm going to end this here. Guys, thank you so much for joining me for my little rant. I hope it was coherent, at least to an interesting degree. If you have any comments or any observations of your own, please leave them in the comments below. and appreciate it. Hope you guys have a good rest of your weekend, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.